Let's talk about another topic in organizational behavior, that is learning. Learning is again a very important topic, and learning means a more or less or relatively permanent change in behavior. So you learned something today and forgot it tomorrow is not learning. Learning is more or less permanent, relatively permanent change in behavior. So that's crucial to remember. So it's not easy to learn something. Today you learn something new, but tomorrow you forgot it. Next day you forget it. That's not, it should lead to a permanent change in behavior. So many times, things like short term training programs may not lead to learning, because sometimes in these training programs the effect doesn't last too long. It's like the fizz of a soft drink subsides after some days. So unless so to effect a permanent change in behavior, maybe the training might have to last longer, or may have to be done repeatedly and reinforced and all that, or it might not work. Some people do learn quickly, and there are people who just hear something once, or who are quick at learning and adapting and adopting. They just pick up a new concept or new idea and implement it immediately. There are people like that who are quick on the uptake. So that's a different case for those people. But in general, for some it would be difficult to do it that way. So for training to lead to learning, it would have to be perhaps a longer duration thing, and would might have to be reinforced and repeated, so that it actually leads to learning. Again, coming back to that, that is permanent change in behavior. Now, you can learn good things and you can learn bad things also. So sometimes somebody has said that you need to unlearn first all the bad things that you learned. Let's say habits, you learn some bad habits. So even giving up bad habits is a difficult thing. I used to smoke, and one day I just gave up cold turkey. Didn't do it gradually. I just kind of drew a line in the sand and said, from now on, no more smoking. So sometimes that is the way it works. You can't do it gradually, it has to be done quickly, ripping off a band aid sort of a thing. I wouldn't say that everybody should do that or it would work for everybody, but that's what worked for me. And I'm not advising that that is the way it should be done. So unlearning is also important, giving up bad things. There is a, and many of us are conditioned to behave in certain ways through experience, observation, environment, consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously. And the conditioning is about perception and attitudes, and we form wrong perceptions and wrong attitudes, and we are conditioned to respond in certain ways which might be wrong, and we may have to unlearn that. That is also difficult. Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov did some famous experiments which are known as classical conditioning. He had dogs, and he experimented on these dogs. Every day he would give food to these dogs at a certain time, and what he would do is he would first ring a bell and then give the food to the dog or the dogs. So that would happen every day. It went on happening days on end. Paolo would appear, ring a bell, put a dish of food, and so the once the dogs saw the food, they would start salivating. Natural appetite would build up, and like you see dogs when they see food, that salivate. And one day Pavlov didn't bring any food, he just rang the bell, and the dog salivated and kept on salivating. Pavlov kept on doing this. He just rang the bell, wouldn't bring the food day upon day, and the dogs would salivate even without food, because the dogs or the dog was conditioned to believe that ringing the bell would means food would appear, and the expectation of food would make him salivate. Even when there was no food, he would still salivate just by ringing the bell. Pavlov rang the bell, didn't give food, and still the dog would salivate, because the ringing of the bell was associated very strongly in the dog's mind, if you can call it that, with food. So the dog was conditioned that way, that ringing would bring food. and he kind of, it became almost like a cause and effect thing. And it was very difficult for the dog to forget this, to decondition this. So sometimes we are conditioned like these dogs. There is just a ringing and we think there is going to be food. So these things need to be unlearned and forgotten if we have picked up these wrong habits or wrong conditioning. So in psychology, there is another phenomenon called learned helplessness. When somebody tries something and fails, or has frustration and stress when he does something, and that happens a couple of times or a few times or repeatedly, then he or she starts believing that, he has no control. He just can't change this. So he becomes helpless. And then he gives up trying. And when it is actually possible for that person to really make a difference and succeed, even then he wouldn't try, because he has learned to be helpless now. Helplessness is conditioned into his or her psyche, because he has accepted that he or she doesn't have any change over the circumstances, and he is just going to fail. It is fated, it is inevitable. So even when it would actually be possible, even when the situation is favorable, and if the person tried that time, he would succeed, he would still not do it, not be able to do it, because he has learned to be helpless. He learns to be helpless, right? Dangerous. So we have to unlearn helplessness if we have learned it. All bad experiences do not have to repeat themselves. Things can change. Things can get better also. Things can get worse, but things can get better also. Nothing is permanent. So learned helplessness is a bad thing that we have to unlearn. So some things have to be unlearned and some things have to be learned. Learning is a permanent change in behavior, as I said. The other important thing in learning is, rather than the trainer or teacher, it's more about the student or the trainee or the learner. Because take the example of any classroom. Same teacher, same material, same syllabus, everybody is listening to him or paying attention, but learning outcomes are different for every student. Why? The teacher is the constant, the student is the variable. So it depends on the student more than the teacher. I believe that you have to learn, you can't be taught. Teaching does play a role. I mean, I'm not saying that there is no role, but learning plays a role. It depends a lot on the student. It is not a passive thing. It's not a one-way street that you get the best possible teacher in the world and you are just passive and it is up to him to teach you, and if he's smart and great, you will learn something. That's not going to happen if you don't pay attention. If you don't have a desire to learn, if you don't pay attention, if you don't have aptitude or desire or anything, the best teacher in the world can't teach you. So a lot depends on the student. And of course, every student has his own way of learning, pace of learning. So I mean, in a classroom, it's not possible. You would have to have one-to-one, and then the teacher would have to be able to customize his style to suit every student. Even that might not be possible for the teacher, because he also is used to a certain way of teaching or style of teaching. He can't cater to everybody's needs. So every student would need a special teacher for himself, one-to-one, and that's difficult. So but the point is, the idea is that learning is not passive. It is not about the teacher, it is about the student, the trainee. Nobody can really be taught if he or she doesn't want to learn. So learning is an active process. You have to participate, you have to pay attention, you have to keep your mind alert, you have to ask questions, you have to try to understand, you have to work at it. Only then you can learn. You learn by different things. You learn by observation, you learn by experience and all that. Some people say that you should learn from others' mistakes. Good. Can they? Some people do learn from others' mistakes. Some people don't learn from others' mistakes. Some people say you can't learn from others' mistakes, you learn only from your mistakes. But do we do that? Do we learn from our own mistakes? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Even after making mistakes, we don't learn, and we keep on making the same mistakes again and again, maybe after some time. We make a mistake, there is a break, then we again make the same mistake. So we may not even be able to learn from our own mistakes, let alone others' mistakes. So it's a bit complicated. So the point I was trying to make is, it's about the students. Students have to pay a lot of attention, and so there are limitations to training, and because it's about the student. And training has a limitation that it can take you to a certain level, but it also depends upon the learning ability of the student. Nowadays we talk of learning disability in special cases like dyslexia or dyscalculia and certain psychological issues or problems, but all of us have some general learning disability. There is a limit to how much we can learn. We also have limitations, you know. And you can always improve if the student and the teacher work at it, the trainer and the trainee work at it. Maybe the trainee can improve and learn a bit more, but there is a limit to how much you can teach or how much you can learn. So beware of trainers who say, I'll make you a genius, or give me I'll teach your kid to, I'll train your kid and he'll become a genius. That doesn't work like that. Albert Einstein wasn't somebody, some teacher took hold of him and then turned him into a genius. Mozart, there are child prodigies, children who you notice from very early on that they are brilliant, they are prodigies, they are geniuses. It becomes apparent very early on. Even intellectual development, IQ development happens very early on in childhood. It becomes very difficult to change it later. So these people were born like that. They had natural gifts. You can't simply take a normal person and turn him into a genius. It doesn't work like that. You can improve. You can improve certain things. You can, but there is some genetics and some DNA that also plays a role. So beware of people who promise miracles. Beware of trainers or teachers or educators and people who say, I'll make you a genius, I'll teach you something. Maybe I can be taught to be a better chess player, but will I become Magnus Carlsen or Anand or Vishwanathan Anand or Pragyanand? Will everybody be equally good at everything? Will I be equally world champion of chess and world champion of swimming and world champion of bicycling? It doesn't work like that. Has anybody ever done that? So it doesn't work like that. And so there are innate abilities also. Learning ability, understanding ability, retention, all those things also play a role. So trainers have a role to play, definitely, but there is a limited role to play. Students also have a big role to play, and a lot also depends upon their own innate abilities and capabilities. One should not forget that. So talking about miracles and all that may happen once in a while, but you can't make it a rule. It can be an exception, maybe sometimes, but generally it doesn't work like that. So beware of people who make these miracle promises, make him a genius or something like that. Many times it doesn't work like that. Take an example of any genius, you know. The other thing is, there is another misconception is that younger people are easier to train or mold. In my experience, sometimes young people are very rigid. It's all about hormones. You know, they are very hormonal and they can be very firm in their beliefs. So it may be very difficult to change them. Life will change them. Today I am talking to somebody who has fixed. He's young and he's strong in his beliefs, or he believes in something very strongly. And I am saying something which is quite opposite to what he is saying or he is believing in. He is not going to accept. Though he's young, he is very rigid. He is going to resist. He is going to resist very passionately, and he is not going to accept me. Maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the line, he experiences some things, and then he may say, okay, oh, you were right. Maybe I was wrong at that point of time. This happens to all of us. At a young age, we may make some very firm idea, form some very firm ideas, and we may be wrong. We may have to drastically change our beliefs. It has happened to me. So it could happen to many people. So it is not so simple to train young people, though everybody says that young people are easier to train and mold. There are young people, maybe like that, who are more amenable and susceptible to training. And there are young people who are not like a sapling that you can just do it that way or mold and shape it accordingly. They are very firm, very rigid, very hard to train. You know, they eventually, there is a lot of ego, there is a lot of hormone, there is a lot of stuff that's going on. And they don't accept that. Whatever you are saying, they resist it, they deny, they reject. Maybe it will happen after some time, and life can make them learn things. Life and life's experiences can be great teachers, not just classroom. And classroom training and teaching have limitations. I mean, you can't have theory of swimming and theory of how to ride a bike. If you want to learn how to swim, you have to actually do it. You can't read a book on swimming, and you can't take a classroom lecture, and you can't take a classroom lecture or read a few pages on how to ride a bicycle. There is no theory, and it would be a very simple theory at that. So that has to be done. You learn by doing things. Maybe sometimes you observe. Different people learn differently, but the best thing to do is to do it yourself. And to develop or master any skill, you have to do it repeatedly and spend a lot of time at it. Only then you can actually learn something. And then once you learn that skill, it is difficult to unlearn also. Like generally people, they've really learned how to swim, they don't forget it. Or they have really learned how to ride a bike, they don't fall off a bike later. I mean, so because it takes time, it's a painful process learning how to swim or learning how to ride a bike. It's not that simple, and it takes time, energy, effort, patience, and all. So learning something would actually make you have would make you have to do it, and doing it repeatedly then makes you learn something, and doing it repeatedly gives you some sort of skill or mastery or something of that sort. So this was one thing that we had not discussed about earlier. So we talked of learning languages also, and learning is a subject also is a very psychologically complex subject. How people learn, unlearn, really learn something, not just textbook learning or learning by rote, making it a part of your behavior or your routine and all that. There are people who are quick at it, they just listen to something and they implement it. There are people who would take a lot of time, they would be very slow at learning, they would have difficulty in learning, and we have that issues. Maybe as we age also there is a problem. But again, young people can be easy to teach, provided they are open-minded, they are receptive, and some of them are quite rigid because they have already preconceived ideas at a young age, and at a young age it's all about hormone and passion, so they will resist it. So sometimes it is very difficult to train young people. On the face of it, if you are a teacher, they'll say yes sir, yes sir, but they don't actually mean it. Internally they are laughing at you, or they are not actually receptive to it. They are obedient to you just externally, they are showing their obedience, but the real respect happens when they really accept you as the teacher, which they may do later on. Maybe when you are teaching them, they don't realize that this guy is making sense. They see it for themselves, learn it for themselves, experience it for themselves, and then they will accept it later on maybe. Thank you.